What's up, team? Mikey Bell here with Outdoor Adventure Training, and today we are talking about just that, training for outdoor adventures. Yes, it is still February. It is still very much ski season with more snow on the way, and we can certainly keep enjoying our turns on the mountain. However, Memorial Day weekend is just 13 weeks away, believe it or not, and that really is the kickoff for a lot of big spring and summer adventures, whether it's backpacking, trekking, trail running, mountaineering, and the time to start preparing for that is upon us. So today we're going to be talking about strategies on how to transition from winter into your favorite spring and summer activities. This is something that I often struggle with and can become conflicted with because I love extending that ski season out as long as I can, especially deep into spring with ski mountaineering adventures, and sometimes we get lucky with those late powder storms in April and even into May. I am not here to say that you should stop skiing, especially if you're of the backcountry variety. Keep getting the goods, stay after it as long as you can. However, it is time to start implementing new training strategies so your body's prepared to meet the demands of the activities you plan to pursue later this year. From my own personal perspective, I have a lot coming up this spring and summer. First and foremost, I will be mountain guiding with Shasta Mountain Guides again in Northern California. I'm already booked up for a half a dozen trips, and I need to start preparing my body so I can not just climb the mountain, but thrive up there and also take care of my wonderful guests. Additionally, I'm signed up for several trail running races ranging from half marathons to 50 milers, and I need to start logging those miles now. So when June and July comes around, I can really ramp up without any issue at all. So for today's discussion, we're going to be walking through an awesome presentation to give you the tools you need to make that transition seamlessly while still enjoying your favorite winter sports, but in the back of your mind, having a game plan for what's to come in months ahead. Before we dive into it, we have had a lot of requests for our oat merch. We got hoodies, we got beanies, we got hats. Our merch store is finally live. We're psyched about it. Head over to our website at outdooradventuretraining.com/merch and get yourself hooked up with a sick hat to power you on these adventures. I'm going to open up this presentation and I am going to shrink into the corner and we're going to be talking about how to spring into fitness. Yes, it is very cliche. I'm okay with that. This is an awesome summit photo from the top of Mount Shasta at 14,179 feet above sea level. This is the client Bashir, who's in our Summit Strength program and summited last year, May 17th. And he has plans to return yet again in April for another private climb on Mount Shasta up a different route this time. Okay, let's dive right into it. Hopefully this won't take too terribly long. Just a quick outline of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about our general approach to fitness and 5 key training pillars that are really key. We're going to be talking about how to implement cardio and hiking into your training program, especially if you've been skiing a lot. You probably haven't been doing a ton of hiking. We're going to talk about stability and strength, best practices to build that, and how to periodize it for yourself. And of course, mobility. We're also going to be talking about nutrition and a few other things sprinkled in here as well. So our general approach to training, and this stands true for regardless of what sport you're training for, are these 5 training pillars. And more or less, the first 2 or 3 are in the right order. Nutrition maybe could be number 1, so could mobility. So it really varies person to person in which weight you should hold these for yourself. However, you cannot deny the importance of sport-specific training. What this means is if you're training for backpacking, you're going on a 7-day backpacking trip in the Wind River Range in Wyoming, you better be training with a backpack and walking. There's no way around that. If you're training for mountaineering, you better be logging a lot of hours walking uphill. There is no supplement for sport-specific training. Cardiovascular training is obviously very much interwoven into that sport-specific training, but there are other ways that we can prioritize that aerobic exercise, and we'll talk about strategies for that. Stability and strength are ultimately what allow us to move up into that cardiovascular training and sport-specific training. Having more stability and strength is going to enhance our cardio and our sport-specific training and creates that awesome upward cycle that we really want with training. These last two here, mobility and nutrition, are probably the two most often overlooked pillars. Yes, we could talk about sleep and sunlight exposure and all of these other things, but for the sake of this conversation, we're keeping our perspective and focus a little bit narrower. And mobility and nutrition are so important when it comes to recovery and longevity. So we're not just thinking about, oh, I'm climbing Mount Rainier in June. It's also bigger picture, what you want to do 5, 10, 20 years from now. I don't know about you, but I definitely still want to be getting after it in the mountains later in life. And because of excellent mobility training and a good approach to nutrition, one quick story to highlight here, and maybe this is more relevant for those of you that are chasing a particular objective or climbing a big mountain or reaching Everest Base Camp or the summit of Kilimanjaro, some geographical location. An amazing mentor of mine at Southern Oregon University, Adam Elson, we were climbing Mount Kirasimbi in Rwanda, and we slept at 11,000 feet, had climbed up from 6,000 feet the day before, and I woke up feeling super ill. So ill, in fact, that I was chewing a banana and I had the thought, I better chew this really well because it is probably coming right back up, which it did. And I decided, despite how crappy I felt, that I would attempt at least the extra 4,000 foot climb up to the summit. And we were working our way up. I had a miserable time, splitting headache, vomiting, was not good. In hindsight, probably should have just gone down. But we were approaching the summit, and Adam said, Mikey, geographical summits are not as important as mental and emotional summits, with the caveat that we were only 200 feet from the summit. But that has always stuck with me, and it is so true. It's so important not to get lost in the objective. There's so much learning and growth that happens along the way that ultimately is going to make you a better human. So yes, focus and train the best you can by doing all of these things to account for your physical ability, but don't lose the forest for the trees. Enjoy the journey. It's an amazing experience training, and all the awesome training hikes you're going to go on preparing for something like that. Really just enjoy the process the best you can, and you're going to have a great outcome whether you reach the summit or not. Okay, so going through each of those 5 pillars now. First, sport-specific training. Again, there's no way around this. You have to implement this into your training program. Yeah, you could swim or bike or elliptical, other forms of cardiovascular training, maybe on rest days or active recovery days. But I'm sorry, you are not going to reach the summit if you swim laps in a pool. We need to train sport specifically. If you're training to swim in a pool and racing swimming, then you probably shouldn't be hiking up a mountain every day. This comes back to the SAID principle, which is specific adaptation to imposed demands. What that means is your body will adapt undoubtedly to the stimulus that you place upon it. So if that means walking uphill with a heavy backpack, it's gonna suck the first few weeks, quite frankly, but you're gonna find more ease as you continue to do that and stay consistent with it, which we'll get to. Depending on where you live, getting this sport-specific training in can be very difficult. Not all of us have trails in our backyard with big hills to practice this on a regular basis, 3 or 4 days a week. You might just be able to get out 1 day a week. That's totally okay, but you're gonna need to be resourceful and creative and find ways to supplement it. So a stair machine at a gym or a stairwell in your office building, you gotta find a way. Maybe it's just stairs in your house and you gotta work up and down those stairs 50 times to get 500 feet of elevation gain. Whatever it is, we need to really try to get creative and find ways that mimic walking uphill, which strength training can also be a way to simulate that. However, nothing can replicate, again, that sport-specific training. Staying consistent, adaptation requires time. I can't tell you how many people show up to Mount Shasta that told me they did 1 training hike last week. Yeah, exactly. They're probably not gonna make it to the top unless they had incredible fitness going into it, which my guess is if they've only hiked once in the last week, probably not. So we need to be methodical, especially if you're coming out of that winter hibernation and just getting back into the trails. Start super small, give yourself that full 13-week block so you can show up with your A game on at the trailhead. Okay, let's keep moving along here. So Cardiovascular training obviously is integrated into the sport-specific training. This can take on a little bit of a different shape, but in my opinion, most outdoor activities are going to require some sort of uphill movement. You're going to be faced with a hill. You're going to be faced with a big climb. Even on the mellowest of backpacking trips, there's going to be some uphill work if you're hiking into a beautiful alpine lake in the Trinity Alps Wilderness or Desolation Wilderness in Lake Tahoe. You got to be able to move uphill efficiently. So always integrate that elevation gain into your training. We'll show you some key ways to do that and how to periodize that in just a few slides. Outside of the uphill training, the heart rate zone training is super, super important. We're going to talk about that way more in depth on the next slide. And of course, as you know, there's a ton of benefits to cardiovascular training outside of just training for whatever objective you're looking for. There's a lot to be said about the cognitive function and mental well-being that you will experience just by getting outside, going for a walk. Something simple like that goes a long way in the big picture of things. Okay, heart rate zone training, all the rage these days, and for good reason. It's super important to have at least a general understanding of heart rate zones. Yes, you can go buy a fancy $600 watch or a heart rate monitor to track these metrics accurately. Notice I said accurately. Honestly, this wrist monitor, this is a nice Suunto 9 watch, is terrible for heart rate monitor on the wrist. And really any wrist heart rate monitor out there is not going to do the job. You have to wear a chest strap to get the most accurate data, which can be a good training tool, but I am not a fan of utilizing that sort of thing in a practical sense when I'm out in the field. So there's some guidelines in here of what to look for to make sure you're in the right heart rate zone. So first, we need to break it down into two major categories. We have the aerobic zones and the anaerobic zone. Aerobic is with oxygen, anaerobic is without oxygen. So hopefully you're starting to understand aerobic movement is lower intensity. You can sustain it for a longer period of time. It's fueled by oxygen, fats, and yes, carbohydrates. Anaerobic is far more intense. This is probably when you're gasping for air, you're feeling winded at the top of a big climb. I'm sure just about everyone watching this video can relate to a time in their life when they felt like they were winded and in that anaerobic zone. And that occurs, yes, you're still, of course, breathing oxygen, but oxygen is not the main pathway. It becomes sugar as a fuel source, carbohydrates, which if you go back to our Eat for Endurance video we do a few weeks ago, I really stress the importance of carbohydrates. That ties into this here. I'm not going to dive too deep into the weeds of nutrition with this, but bringing it back to heart rate zone training. Heart rate zones 1 and 2 is where you should be logging a vast majority of your time, 70% approximately. If it's 60 or 75, you're going to be okay, but aiming for about that 75% range. So before we dive into the individual heart rate zones, you need to identify your heart rate max, which is a very simple equation that actually works pretty well, which is simply 220 minus your age. I'm 30 years old. By this equation, my heart rate max would be 190. I will say, wearing a heart rate monitor, I have gotten my heart rate higher than 190. Training and structured heart rate zone training can push all of these numbers, or it could also decrease these numbers with lack of training. So don't live and die by this equation. It's going to take some time for you to experiment and really find which zones are accurate for you. 50 to 70% of heart rate max. I might be at 68% of my heart rate max and still be in zone 1. Someone who's less trained, that's 70% of their heart rate max, they might be in zone 2. So keep that in mind. These numbers aren't set in stone. There is some plasticity to them. So again, heart rate zone 1, this is amazing foundation. These, in my mind, zone 1 is more of a recovery effort. I usually reserve heart rate zone training for a recovery day, easy walk through the woods, no heavy backpack. Maybe it's gardening or other chores around the house. In my mind, that's really zone 1. Super, super low intensity, lower than you probably think, but still high enough where your heart rate is elevated. But I wouldn't necessarily call that a structured bout of training. Maybe very early on in your phases of training, you could integrate that in there. But really where we want to cache most of our time and log those training hours is in heart rate zone 2. There's a lot of research just in the last few years coming about zone 2 and how critical it is for not just aerobic function, but also longevity and feeling good as you get older and maintaining a baseline of fitness. So this is slightly above that aerobic base, but we're not in zone 3 yet. And this can be hard to differentiate from zone 1 and zone 2. It's a bit of a gray area for some people, and it really depends. Really good rule of thumb: if you can breathe through your nose and maybe it's slightly labored, maybe you're struggling a little bit to finish sentences, but you could still have a conversation, good chance you're in zone 2. And this is where we really want to log a lot of those hours. Again, a lot of people want to go the high intensity because they think they're going to get the results there. However, if you're training for the sports we're talking about, mountaineering, backpacking, hiking, trail running, when you're out there doing the thing, more than 70% of what you're doing, I could almost guarantee, is going to be in the aerobic zones. So that is exactly how we should train. Just because we're placing so much emphasis on the aerobic zones does not mean that we should avoid the anaerobic zones. They are very important. We're just spending less time there because they're potent, they're high intensity. We don't need to log 10 hours a week in aerobic training, and if you do, you're probably going to be pretty smoked by the end of it, would be my guess. But when we're in that anaerobic zone, we're improving our anaerobic threshold and our VO2 max, which if you plan at traveling at high altitude above, let's say 10,000 feet, you're going to Everest Base Camp, you're going to Kilimanjaro, you're climbing a 14er, improving that VO2 max will be a game changer for how well you're able to acclimatize, although there's still not a lot of solid research on this. Speaking anecdotally, I know that if I have some anaerobic training before I get to high altitude, and I mean like in the weeks and months before, not immediately before, I feel better and I feel that I acclimatize better. And at the very least, my body knows how to respond in low oxygen environments, which when you're working in these higher heart rate zones, that's exactly where you are. But take a look at these numbers here. We don't need to spend a lot of time there. Sometimes I'll integrate all of these zones into one longer effort, which happens pretty naturally. Let's say you're going on a 6-mile hike with a 30-pound backpack. It's flat for the first 2 miles, and then you got 2 miles of uphill and then 2 miles of downhill. Maybe I'm in zone 1 and 2, maybe zone 2 for that first flat, and then maybe I'm pushing into zone 3 and 4 on that climb. So that's about 30%-ish of that. And then the two miles coming back down, I'm back into those aerobic zones. That's a great way to structure a workout where we're working all of those systems in one workout with about the same percentages that we're looking for. Okay, maybe I'll do a whole nother video on heart rate zone training because there's a lot more to talk about, but we're gonna keep moving on here for the sake of brevity. Okay, here's an example of a 12-week periodized hiking program. You should not live and die by this. You could take a screenshot of it. You could generally structure your training around it. However, it very much depends on where you're coming in as far as what's your fitness level like as you enter week 1, what your objective is, the time till your objective, any other injuries, or maybe you're traveling during weeks 5 through 8. These are all things to consider when building out your own personal hiking program, and it very, very much depends. And this might look intimidating when you look down to these last weeks, like you want me to hike for 13 miles and 5,000 feet of elevation gain with a 50-pound backpack? Maybe, maybe not. It depends, again, on your goals, but don't lose the plot. One of my favorite quotes from Lao Tzu ever: the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. We just got to start one day at a time, ease into things slowly. So you'll notice all of these metrics slowly increase over time. Depending on what you're training for, the mileage number might not be that important, or maybe you don't need to go to 60 pounds in your backpack. For example, mountaineering. To climb to the summit of Mount Shasta and back is only 13 miles, but it is 7,000 feet of elevation gain, and you will be carrying a 50 to 60 pound pack for at least the first day of your climb. So no, if you're training for Mount Shasta, you do not need to walk for 17 miles with a 60 pound pack. If you do, good on you. I hope that you are my guest this year. However, If you were doing 7, 6, 12-mile hikes somewhere in this ballpark with these weights for your backpack and that 40 to 60 pound, awesome. You're gonna be in really good shape. Inversely, if you're doing a through hike that's a lot of miles every single day, but you're planning on carrying no more than 30 pounds at any time, great. We need to switch all of these numbers up. Maybe you're crushing 20 to 30 miles a week with a 30-pound backpack. So these are all different ways we can manipulate this, and we really need to focus on looking at what the objective that you're training for and the metrics of that endeavor. So what's the mileage of the effort? What's the elevation gain? How much weight are you going to be required to carry? These are all things to consider. Last thing I'll say about this before we move on is I would err on the side of more. I'm usually a fan of less is more, but on this side of things, preparing, you want to show up and then freaking enjoy it and not be dying. If you're coming to climb Shasta and you think your backpack's going to be about 45 pounds, you better carry 55 in your training hikes. That way it feels light when you do the thing. If you practice how you play, you're going to perform that much better. And in this sense, practicing by carrying a 60-pound backpack, when you go for the real deal and it's 45 pounds, boom, you're slinging that thing over your shoulder and you're jetting up the mountain. It's not even a concern. I recently saw, not to go too much down the rabbit hole, a How to Train for Backpacking by REI, a PDF download, and they recommend carrying no more than 80% of your pack weight on the final training hikes, which in my mind, you're setting your guests up for failure because they have never carried that much weight. You need to carry that much weight. It's really important. Anyway, last thing to note here, that final week of your effort leading into the effort, and really I wouldn't even say the whole week, probably the 3 to 5 day window, depending on where you're at and how much you've been doing, tapering off a little bit, easing into it, focusing on the mobility, the nutrition, maybe some easy numbers, 5 miles with a 20-pound pack, really bringing it down. That doesn't mean no training, complete rest, but light aerobic active recovery routines. Okay, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this stuff because we have all of these videos on our website, but I do want to go through this, and I will make sure that this PDF is available on our website. There'll be a link in the description below to access that. So stability training, by and large, is the most important thing you can do. You're going to help build neuromuscular efficiency. You're going to work out imbalances in your kinetic chain. You're going to show up a more stable and durable athlete by practicing these sorts of movements. So primarily focus is on core engagement and activation. So being able to really engage your core musculature, which is going to aid in balance, which is going to aid in carrying a backpack, and posterior chain engagement, which is going to allow you to move uphill far more efficiently. This is all embedded in all of our training programs. Very simple exercises in stability phase and stabilization, but I promise you, they're not easy. Get a lot of people that will sign up for a program and say, hey, can you bump me up to strength endurance phase? And I'm like, well, yeah, but give these stability workouts just a shot for a couple weeks. And most people are blown away by how difficult they are because we're really focusing on going slow. And that's the real key here. We're using a very slow tempo. We have a ton of videos on our channel that dive way into the weeds of stability training. After 4 to 6 weeks of stability training, notice 4 to 6 weeks, it takes time to build a strong foundation. We can then migrate into a strength endurance style phase. This should be home for most outdoor athletes, is strength endurance. When you think about moving uphill or running 50 miles, you need some freaking endurance. And that's what strength endurance training is all about. We're not using super heavy weights. Rather, we're focusing on going for 60, 90 seconds, really cranking out those reps. Oftentimes using some sport specific movements like step ups. If you don't have access to elevation near your house, find an 18-inch box and do 500 step ups. That'll be freaking hard. I don't do a lot of that because I do have hills in my backyard and I'm grateful for that. Plyometrics are a really amazing thing as well, just to work on building that muscular endurance, be able to repeat the same repetition over and over and over again, and the ability to manipulate variables. So adjusting the weights, adjusting the exercises, the number of reps. You got to play with all these things just like we do in our periodized hiking. The weights go up, maybe the mileage goes down, and same with strength training. Maybe the weight that you're using goes up a little bit, the reps go down a little bit, but ultimately, max strength training can be beneficial. If you're doing it within 12 weeks of your big objective, you're probably a little behind the game. If you want max strength training, hit me up in our custom programs. We do that often, but it is not applicable for many athletes. I shouldn't say that. It's applicable for most. It's difficult to program unless you are coming at it from a really solid foundation of training and you have very intentional reason why you're doing it. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. I promised myself I wouldn't talk about it, and I did anyway because I get fired up about it sometimes. Anyway, so stability training, strength endurance training, that should really be your home for workouts, and that's going to give you everything you need, plus the sport-specific training, the cardiovascular training. You're freaking showing up to Shasta or Rainier or the PCT freaking dialed, set up for success. But not without the complement of mobility training. If any of you have been following this channel for any amount of time, you should know that I am a huge fan of mobility training, and generally in the form of foam rolling and other self-myofascial release techniques, and static, dynamic stretching, active mobility sequences and movements, things where we're trying to mobilize the joint. Of course, it's going to help your joint range of motion and your overall mobility in day-to-day life. Even something as simple as reaching to grab your water bottle out of your backpack. You need some shoulder mobility to make that happen. It's going to significantly improve your recovery times from your workouts, especially just having that tool in your back pocket. If your hips are tight, I know that I can do a lunge stretch to help alleviate that. I know I can foam roll my quads to help alleviate some of that tension so you can train again, especially as you get into week 6 to 10 or 11. You're going to be working pretty hard, I hope, for your objective coming up. And this is where this stuff will help keep you balanced, help you relax at the end of the day so you can get good sleep, so you can show up for your next workout 100%. And of course, long-term longevity. Mobility is the number one thing that keeps people from doing things later in life. Stay on it now. It won't be a problem when you're 60. Okay, nutrition. We're gonna keep this pretty brief. If you want to get a full download on nutrition, check out our website. We have a free PDF download, which is the same Eat for Endurance PDF that we went over just like this on our YouTube channel a couple weeks ago. So check that out. Learn how to calculate your caloric needs, maybe track your caloric needs for some amount of time, especially as you ramp up training. That's where a lot of athletes fall short, is they ramp up their training, their nutrition stays the same, and they wonder why they're struggling. If your if your training goes up and you're burning more and more calories, you need to match that with your nutrition. Preparing to climb Mount Shasta, your primary goal should not be to lose 20 pounds. That might be a result or a byproduct of the training, but now is not the time to cut calories. And I'm just using Mount Shasta as an example. It could be any backpacking trip or trek. Yes, losing a little bit of weight can definitely help. Why would you carry that extra 20 pounds up the mountain or on your trek if you don't have to? But we're not cutting carbs. We're not eliminating certain foods, maybe, but hopefully you're getting the picture. We want to eat for performance, not for aesthetic. Nutrient timing becomes really key. Make sure you're eating a well-balanced meal before your effort, recovering afterwards. Nutrition is everything to help you recover. Otherwise, you will not have the juice to get back out there today. This is where carbohydrate loading before big hikes, after big hikes is really, really key. If you want to learn more about nutrient timing, scan this QR code, head over to our website. I'll also embed a link in the description for that one down below so you can check that out. And that really builds off of the Eat for Endurance. So make sure you are reading this one first, calculating your needs, then focus on the timing. Although they do go hand in hand. And of course, micronutrients. They're micro, but they're freaking mighty. all of those fat-soluble vitamins, water-soluble vitamins, as well as all the minerals, play such a key role in your overall health and performance. Do not overlook it. I'm a big fan of a plant-based whole foods diet. I've been vegan for more or less 10 years and has really enhanced my training and ultimately my recovery. So I can do 3,000 feet of elevation gain and go back out there tomorrow and basically repeat it. If you feel really lost with nutrition, do not hesitate to hit me up. We do offer full nutrition guidance and counseling in our custom training programs. If you feel like you got it pretty dialed with nutrition, any of our other training programs are going to be an awesome fit for you. Our Ridge Runner program is designed for trail runners. Backpackers Boot Camp is obviously for those that are looking for those weekend backpacking trips or maybe doing multiple backpacking trips. Trek Prep, this is really ideal for anybody who's going to Everest Base Camp, Mount Kilimanjaro, Camino de Santiago, Machu Picchu, anything where you're walking day in and day out, that's the perfect program for you. And our Summit Strength program. This is a mountaineering program. Shasta, Mount Whitney, Rainier, Baker, and beyond. This should be, or I shouldn't say should be, it's a great tool, has a lot of resources, and with it, you get access to our Snow School, which is a 24-lesson online course that has everything from how to put your gaiters on and your crampons on, all the way into the weeds of self-arrest and how to carry your ice axe, and basically a full snow school that you will likely take on whatever outfitter you're climbing with, or if you're climbing alone, you should definitely make sure you're brushed up on skills. And we are also in the process, and it's a lengthy process, of building courses to match each program. So our Backpackers Boot Camp, by May, we'll have a full course accompanied with the program, which will talk about backcountry nutrition, how to set up your tent, pack your backpack, all the nitty-gritty things that often get overlooked when preparing for a backpacking trip. So check out our website, outdooradventuretraining.com. Get yourself set up for success. Most of these programs are designed for about a 12-week approach. Although if you're coming in at week 8 or week 16, we still got you covered. You'll be fine. But 12 weeks is kind of the sweet spot to start preparing. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation on how to really ramp up your fitness this spring. If you are heading out on some really awesome adventures, please leave a comment below. We love to know what all of our viewers are up to and what you want to see going forward. We're definitely switching gears with our content, more away from the ski specific training, more so into trekking, backpacking, mountaineering specific workouts. If you have any specific requests, please let us know. We love helping you all out and being an awesome resource to help make the outdoors more accessible and so people can have a safe time when they're out there. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time here at Outdoor Adventure Training.